Hi friends, you're listening to the Shattered Ceilings podcast with your hosts Stephanie and Adriana. We're here to discuss the importance of mental health from the perspective of two first-generation immigrants. Join in weekly as we dive into important topics such as relationships, parenting, and cultural barriers. Here, we get real and candid as we explore what disrupting the status quo looks like for each of us. Welcome back to another episode of Shattered Ceilings podcast with your hosts Adriana
and Stephanie.
We hope you enjoyed episode 7. We received so much feedback and it seemed like it was very helpful and encouraging to everyone. So we are so thankful for Anka and Andrea for all their knowledge that they shared with us. We talked about this a little bit earlier. It was just so cool to have us conversating, and I was like looking at Anka, who is my therapist, and I was like, she's in my house.
Yeah.
We're talking about mental health. Like, I'm married now, and it was just such a different season. I was like,
full circle moment.
Yeah, like I was literally thinking like my first session with her. I wasn't married. I didn't even know James. I was still living at home. It was just cool to see where I am now. So
Very
that
cool.
was a really cool episode.
I was really excited, as you guys could tell.
Fangirly.
For me, I was like, for the first time, like I went home and told my husband, like today was like such a cool memory for me, just because I felt so validated, like that what I was doing is the right thing for me, just because I felt like, okay, hearing people talk about it who have been doing it for so long made me feel like so much more passionate, and like it gave me kind of like a boost to like you know,
reassurance.
Reassurance. Like it's not, obviously the schooling is not easy, but I'm like, okay, this is meant for me. And just like I was like so challenged on the episode with them. I was so mentally challenged. Like
that's good though.
I told Finney, I went home, I was like, I feel so dumb. Like, but that's how you know you're in the right place. Like when you have people around you that are challenging you mentally, and it's kind of like forcing you to rise a little bit to a different level. That's how you know that you're in the right place
to be.
Yeah, and so I have to thank, and I told Finney, Adriana, all like, no, really? Because you made the connection. Like, you knew Anka and you knew Andrea, so I'm like, that's so cool. Like, I owe that so much to Adriana, like, for making, you know, that connection.
I'm just attracting all the therapists in my life.
I know, it's so cool. Well, you never know what it means.
I know.
So
it was so cool. And again, I hope it did help people. We did get a lot of good feedback.
A lot. We're still getting a lot of good feedback.
And I want them back, even if it's just like one of them for an episode. So
I agree. They didn't get rid of us, that's for sure. So
I know. I'm curious of other convos we can have with them. But with today's episode, we are talking about conflict, how to resolve conflict in a healthy and mature way. We did a poll on social media, and that was the topic that won. So I'm happy we're talking about it, because it's a topic that we can all apply to our lives and our relationships.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I can guarantee anybody who's listening, if you're not currently in a conflict, you're either coming out of one or you're going to approach one very soon. So it's just something that I think we all avoid, and like the word conflict can stir up so many like unpleasant feelings in a lot of us, like anxiety or fear. But the harsh reality is we all deal with it throughout our life. But the key is not to fear or try to avoid conflict, but to learn how to resolve it in a healthy way. So Adriana, you've talked about people pleasing before in our episodes. Do you feel like people pleasing plays at all into people like avoiding conflict?
Yes, definitely. Looking back, I would avoid conflict because I didn't want people to be upset. I didn't want to confront people. And so I would just like hide it under the rug and just pretend everything was cool when clearly it wasn't. So I think definitely if you're still dealing with people pleasing, it's going to be a struggle. I feel like now not that I like to confront people, but like I feel more confident about it. And it's just a mature thing to do. And I get upset when people don't confront me.
You know it's going to help in the long run if you do it correctly.
So I think confrontation is just, in a healthy way, it's a very good thing. So I think if you're still dealing with people pleasing, conflict can kind of give you that like uneasy feeling.
And I think we talked about this earlier. You mentioned like we were kind of brainstorming. Have we ever had a personal situation where we have seen like conflict resolution be successful.
Yeah.
And like, what did you say?
Well, okay, obviously we posted the poll and I was like, okay, both topics are good. I'm curious which one like our viewers want to talk about, and then conflict one, which I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I started thinking about it and I was like, I think I'm going to learn about this a lot when we talk about it, because I don't think I've had a successful conflict resolved.
Yeah.
Either because of me or the other party, or just because people are like avoiding it. So I was kind of laughing because I was like, what does that look like? Because every time I had a conflict with someone, it just, either I thought we had a good talk and then we left and then I heard them talking bad about me and how I dealt with things, or it just never went well. So I'm very curious to see.
And that, I think, also makes people fearful. When you have so many bad experiences like that, you're like, okay, well, maybe it's not the right thing to confront it or to resolve it. But I kind of thought of this topic because I like looked around me and I saw so many people that I'm like, okay, like, obviously it's normal and it's part of the human experience to have disagreements. Like, we all have such different opinions. And even, like, in the church, like, because we both go to the same church, we all have different opinions, different views on things. So it's totally normal that you're going to clash. But if you don't know how to resolve conflict, especially as a Christian, like, that is, first of all, a bad testimony to the world.
Yeah.
And I think it leads to a lot of unnecessary drama and like negativity and toxicity in the church particularly. So I kind of was like, okay, like, I think this is kind of a good thing to bring up and study and talk about. Yeah. So a lot of us believe that conflict can break a relationship apart. And I think that's where a lot of that fear stems from. But in reality and truthfully, if we know how to handle conflict in a positive and, most important, in a respectful way, it can actually strengthen a bond between two people, whether that's like a friendship or a marriage or any type of relationship.
Yeah. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah, exactly. Conflict resolution can be wrapped up into like a set of skills that we're going to talk about, that these skills are learnable like any other set of skills. But before we do that, we should first determine and define what a conflict is. Because I think a lot of us have a hard time or have like a different, like a preconceived notion of what conflict is. A conflict is more than a simple disagreement. It can be like a situation in which one or both of the parties feel threatened. And because conflicts involve like perceived threats to our well-being, and we'll talk about that later where fight or flight comes in, conflicts will stay with us until we face them head on and resolve them.
Yeah, they don't go away.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you might think that will be because I brushed under the rug, like, you know, it's fine, but it will come back up.
Yeah,
like,
time doesn't heal conflict.
Exactly. It will come back up. Like in the form of like it just like unhealed trauma. But so that's why it's really important to just kind of nip it in the bud, you know, the right way and the correct way.
Yep.
And this also plays a lot into emotional intelligence. The more you are emotionally aware of yourself, I think, the like easier it is, and the more you understand the importance of conflict resolution. The way that we respond to conflict in our lives is oftentimes based on our perception of the situation, and not necessarily based on an objective view of the facts of the situation. So for example, it's really important for us not to try to like prove our truth in a conflict, because your truth is going to be different than the other party's truth.
Yeah, which is hard.
It's hard, and it's all the way you look at the situation. Our perceptions are what can be influenced by our culture, the way we grew up, life experiences, beliefs. What perceptions, Adriana, do you feel like the Romanian community might have towards conflict or confrontation?
That's a good question.
Or like, how have you, like, growing up, how did you see conflict, for example? Through what lens?
I was gonna say, taking it back to my childhood, obviously we love our parents and we respect them, but we're also gonna not see eye to eye with our parents, especially in your teenage years,
right?
When you're learning. So I realized every time I had a disagreement and it turned into this huge conflict, it kind of ended the conversation of like, I'm your parent, you need to respect me and honor me, and you live inside my house, this is how we think, and you need to think like this.
Disrespectful.
Yeah, which I I can see that, but at the end of the day, we're going to have conflict. And I think it's still okay to even talk to your parents and sit down and have a mature adult conversation.
Right.
And then thinking about like friendships, I feel like when you were saying a lot of people look at conflict like, oh my gosh, if we have a conflict between me and my friend, we're not going to be friends anymore. Or what if this will break it? Or even with like boyfriends, like, oh, we have this argument, what if this is going to break us apart? So it's like that fear of breakups and rejection. But I think growing up, you mature and you realize conflicts are always going to be there. And again, you just need to learn how to argue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think growing up, we saw it as a negative thing. If you could avoid it, just avoid it. It's not worth it.
Right.
I think a lot of people are also very passive, and they come across as in like, oh, no drama zone, I don't care, I don't want to hear about it, which sounds nice, like, wow, they're drama free, but if you really look into it, they may be really being passive, and especially when it's with men, it's like, no, you need to man up and talk about this.
Right.
Like, you not caring actually shows that you care and you're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, so that's a good point to bring up.
Yep.
I also think it has a lot to do with like emotional awareness. We talked about obviously how our parents growing up were not always emotionally available. So I think that even how they grew up, we talk about this all the time, like under communism, where you couldn't have a voice and you were not supposed to challenge the agenda that was given to you.
The authority.
So I think, the authority. So I think that was kind of passed down to us. And so conflict is shunned, looked at as disrespectful. And so we are not only not raised seeing what healthy conflict looks like, but it's not encouraged, I think, to resolve conflict.
Also, in the Christian community, I feel like they don't want issues. They want to be united. They want to be at peace. And I get that we should strive for that. But sometimes conflict will bring you that peace or to be more united.
It will strengthen, the relationship.
So I think that's why the church would also avoid it, because they don't want the church to split up or they don't want people leaving. But sometimes you need to have these conversations, or like you said, they're going to come up. You need to have
the hard conversations, because out of those hard conversations, sometimes can come really good solutions.
Yeah.
And then that for sure goes into the fact that conflict can be a means for growth in a relationship. Because if we can resolve an issue in a relationship correctly, it builds trust between those two people. I've seen that a lot in my life as well.
Yeah, that's also a good one with like friendships. And I think having a conflict with friendships test if like they are your friends.
Yeah.
If they are going to respect you, if they are going to trust you. Like I said, I had conflicts with friends in the past, and I left the convo like, okay, finally we can move on. And then later that week I would hear her gossiping about what I said that was like very confidential, and I was being open and honest. So like that would hurt me, like thinking I could trust this friend, having these hard convos, and then hearing it go behind my back.
That's what's hard, I think, is knowing that you can't control the other party that you have the conflict with. The only thing you can do is control yourself. And sometimes it's even you thinking, is it worth it with this person? If you know the person well, and you know that having a discussion with them is not going to lead to any resolution, then you know, I did my part, and that's as far as it can go in that relationship.
Yeah, I agree. I think God gives us wisdom on like kind of going back to boundaries of like, who can I trust, or will this person be open to what I have to say?
Right.
So with that being said, what are some skills we can all apply?
So first, I want you guys to remember the phrase soft startup. I listened to a podcast a while ago from Focus on the Family, where Dr. Randy Schroeder was talking about habits of a happy marriage. And I know obviously we're not talking about marriage specifically here, but I think it can definitely apply. And he talks about, you're going to argue anyways, like it or not, in a marriage, because obviously you're two people with two different pasts and baggages and everything, and you come together and you have, issues that come up, two different point of views and all of this. So you're going to argue and you're going to have disagreements, but it's important to learn how to argue correctly, or how to, have these disagreements in a correct way. He talks about having a soft startup to an argument or a disagreement. When you confront the other party, you want to have a soft startup as opposed to a harsh startup. a soft startup in a conversation sets a positive tone to the rest of the conversation.
Yeah.
So what does this look like? It looks like not using accusatory words like you always or you never. I think women do this a lot. We like to like talk in term like in exaggeration sometimes, like you never take out the trash, but really like he's done it before, but just because you're angry now, you know, you're using these accusatory words. And for the other party, what does this do? It automatically puts them on a defense. And when you are trying to resolve a conflict successfully, you need to realize that you're not against each other. You are trying to work together as a team to take down that conflict. So you don't want to use any accusatory words that causes the other party to go on the defensive right away. Try to replace those phrases, for example, with I or we phrases, like we have a problem, we need to talk. Or if you're trying to convey to the other party, you know, I feel hurt right now, then you say to them, I feel hurt by your actions, or I feel like you need to do this for me. It just helps to take the spotlight off that person. They're not as defensive. Sometimes even Dr. Randy Schroeder suggests this to start the conversation with, I need your help, because it's a disarming phrase. So I need your help to tackle this problem or something. And I think that that's a great thing that we can all employ when we're dealing with conflict resolution. He also talks about using the rifle approach, which basically means that like a rifle is a single bullet shotgun. We should focus in each disagreement on one hurt or one disappointment. I think that's another thing that can really escalate conflict. Is you start bringing up a bunch of stuff from the past.
I was gonna say, I think that's like the biggest. Like, as soon as you hear someone bring up something that has nothing to do with this issue, at least for me, when I would hear that, I'm like, okay, this convo's over.
Exactly. So like, the other party shuts down, and then the party that's bringing up all these things from the past is like all of a sudden on a monologue. And they're just like stuck in their world, bringing up all these things. And that's not going to end in resolution, because the other party's going to feel attacked. They're going to feel, okay, turned off, whatever. So it's important to use and to bring up one hurt or one disappointment during the argument. Going further, the argument should be a dialogue and not a monologue. I think, again, another problem when you're in your feelings, it's true. Some of us, you know, you just not ramble, but you go on this like
you're
long,
in the moment. And
when we get like heated and emotional, we tend to go on these long-winded rants. Make sure the argument, and think of it like a game of tennis, where it's going back and forth. You should say 3 sentences and then allow the other person to speak 3 sentences and back and forth. This just helps both parties to be heard equally. Make sure you're not monopolizing the conversation. I understand in the moment we're emotional, we're trying to get our point across, but we're just hurting ourselves in the long run, because that like conversation is not going to be resolved that way correctly. So I think that going forward, it would be cool for you to kind of talk about like the Romanian community, how you see them dealing with conflict.
I mean, again, not only Romanians have this issue, but us growing up in the community, and that's like what we're around and what we see. I realize, like most Europeans, we're very passionate.
Latin,
we are emotional. Usually, I mean, everyone again is different. We had our whole emotional podcast before. Like I said, when I'm in conflict, I tend to not cry. I'm not a crier, but then the other person can maybe be being emotional and they're crying too, which I think is also hard when you have 2 different personalities, which we all are different. If one person's more emotional and the other person doesn't, you might leave the convo like, wow, I was crying and they were so cold-hearted and didn't care. And it's like, no, you need to understand some people just aren't going to be crying. And also don't apologize if you're crying. Like, that's your personality. I think that's okay. So I think just being aware that everyone has different personalities, being Romanian, like I said, it's in our blood to be very passionate and emotional. I think also maybe more women, like, we want to be right. Even if we're not right. And I feel like I catch myself too, like in the conversation, you have that moment of like, dang, they're right. like, should I tell them? And you really, like, don't want to, and you're stubborn because you're like, I just spent all this time proving my point.
Yeah, that's true.
And now I have to, like, be humble and be like, okay, you are right. But I think, again, I didn't really grow up seeing that, where people were like, okay, I'm sorry, I was wrong. It's more like, no, I stand by my word, because that's my pride, and that's who I am, and my word is my word. It's like, okay, but if you know you're in the wrong, just say it. Like, and I think it's a humbling experience.
That's like literally another episode we need to do, like learning to say sorry when you're an adult.
Yeah.
I think that's hard. That's something I struggled with for sure. And I think gave my husband a lot of gray and white hair, because he's the kind of person that apologizes very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's just my nature that it's hard for me, and I've had to learn how to do it. And it's funny because now I see it with my daughter. And I'm like, oh,
is she like you?
Yes. Oh. I'm like, girl, like, oh my gosh, you gotta work on this. So I can't stress how important it is to remove your emotions when you're trying to solve a conflict. I know it's easier said than done, but just think of this scenario. Someone comes up to you and starts an argument, and you all of a sudden experience this intense rush of emotions. This actually causes your emotional intelligence to drop. So say goodbye to all the soft skills that you've been trying to master, because your amygdala in your brain will trigger the fight or flight response, and then stress hormones are going to surge throughout your body, and all your logical thought goes out the window. So during these times, it's really important to be able to rein in those emotions in order to successfully resolve the conflict. And some ways you can do that, practical ways, are take a deep breath, count to 10, or simply saying, hey, this is not a good time to have this discussion, but choosing to have the discussion, but actually having it, not just sweeping under the rug.
Yeah.
Choosing to have the discussion at another point in time when you think that you're in a better emotional state to do it. Because if you go like into a discussion like that, fully emotionally charged, it's not going to end well.
Yeah, usually doesn't end well. I feel like these skills are so easy to hear, and I feel like it's what we teach kids. Like, hey, you're upset, let's take a deep breath, or hey, let's go in your room and we'll talk about it later. It's so easy that like we're trying to teach our kids this, and then here we are as adults like
teaching ourselves. It's true.
Or not teaching and not being aware, but like I said, we want to teach ourselves to do this, and it's just like a practice and a habit we need to do.
It's a habit that I think also the more we do it, the more confidence, like you said, you get in yourself to be like, okay, this is the issue, I need to confront the other party. The more you do it, I promise it becomes easier.
And like, maybe more natural too.
It just comes more naturally for you to go into the conversation and be like, okay, this is the issue, how are we going to tackle it? And an important thing to like know is sometimes it's really hard, like we said, you can't control the other party, but you just know, okay, these are the skills that I have, you know, in my pocket to resolve this. This is what I can do, you know, to better it.
I love that. I also think being aware, like the whole emotional intelligence thing, I usually, which I think this is a good thing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but since I am aware of how I am or my emotions or feelings or how I think it's also healthy when you're having a conflict with someone, saying like, hey, this was my thought process when I said this, or like, this is what I was feeling, or this is what I was doing, so they know your intention, rather than just saying all these things that they like might not know, if that makes sense.
Like, that's really important, because it's accountability, and it's showing the other person like, hey, I'm human. You can, when you're accountable like that, you encourage the other person to also be accountable for their actions. And if both parties don't admit, like in a conflict, their wrongdoing, then you're not going to get anywhere. So I think that that's really great that you do that.
Well, I always wanted to like put the person in my shoes of how I felt, or like if the other person is crying, instead of not saying anything, I would just like, hey, like, I know you're crying, I just want to let you know, just since I'm not super emotional, I'm not crying, doesn't mean I feel like hurt right now. Like, my hurt might look different than yours, or I might leave and then get emotional.
I think that it's easier for me and you maybe because we're more logical.
Yeah, and
I look at a problem like, okay, this is the problem. How do we fix this and like take care of it?
It's like a brain thing, not a heart thing.
Yeah, that's how it is for me. That's why talking
No,
to people who are more emotional, I understand, but also like I have like a close friend that is a person that's like that, more emotional, and during conflict, everything would be like the end of the world because
like all emotion.
Yeah, felt so deeply, and sometimes I wish that I was like that because I think that's a really cool gift to be able to be so emotional and empathetic.
Yeah.
But then it would like hurt that person because the other person either didn't understand where they were coming from, or it would just end in the conflict not being resolved, and then that person like learned, okay, this is what I need to do, remove my emotion in these times, and actually it's helped a lot. So it's something for sure that can be learned.
Yeah, I think on both sides, like, I just told my friend, like, I wish I was emotional. I wish I could cry right now to show you that I'm hurt or that this is upsetting. It just doesn't come natural to me. And then those who are, like, crying and are emotional, I think it's still healthy to become a little bit more logical. You don't have to
balance of everything.
Yeah, like, you don't have to apologize for crying. It's okay that you're crying, but you also need to be logical and, like, go back to like, why are we arguing? Because I think once emotions get involved, it's hard and you kind of get blinded by all of that.
I think also like people who are like that, more emotional, in a way it's kind of easier because you get all your emotion out. But like people like us, I don't know if this applies to you, but like when you're more logical, okay, I might not be crying right now, but if I go home, like I'm thinking about this in my brain all day and it's so annoying. Like I wish I could just get it out and just
cry and move on.
Yeah, so it's like you said, it's both sides. And I think seeing and knowing the other person too, that you're, you know, in the conflict with, whatever relationship it may be, just knowing their weaknesses, your weaknesses. Most important is knowing, okay, like we're on the same team, like let's try to come together even in a friendship and like figure it out. Whether the resolution is we learn from this and go forward in our relationship, or a resolution can be, hey, we don't see eye to eye and that's okay, like I wish you the best, and you know, this
and break up with.
Yeah, it's true. I know it's hard to hear, but it's true. You know, that also is a form of resolution for both parties.
I was gonna say, if you're in a position with either a boyfriend or just friend and you're having like the same issues or the same problem and they're really not changing or they don't show like they're putting effort, I think it's mature to say like, hey, I've given you so many chances. We're trying to resolve this conflict and it's just not happening, and like you said, like we wish you the best, but this is just not the person for me. And with friendships and relationships, like I think it's okay to be aware that there's people for a season, or like there's a reason sometimes the conflict might end in you guys splitting off, but it's probably for the best.
Right.
So it's...
And that doesn't mean that that's going to be that forever.
Oh, yeah,
I've had experiences where at a time in my life, I was really close with somebody, and then we went through kind of a rough patch, but we grew in different directions. And then after that, we were able to like come together again because we had both matured so much. And I think that's really special too. So just knowing that the most important thing is to resolve the conflict, and resolving it doesn't mean sweeping it under the rug and talking crap about that person behind their back. Like that's not resolving a conflict.
Which I think most Romanians...
A lot of Romanians do that because it's the easy way out. But then that's only going to cause more issues. So it's like, what does it help in the long run? Yeah,
I think the biggest thing in friendships or whenever you have a conflict, even with a family member, whoever it is to respect the convo, to leave the convo where it was. I know we have friends or like our husbands where we can like vent out or just talk to them about what happened. That's different than going to the whole world and if anyone ever mentions their name, talking crap about them or being like, oh, they did this and this and this. It's like, that's not healthy. That's not fair to the other person. And I think in my early 20s, I went through a stage where I like was observing all my friends in the Romanian community. I don't know if all Romanians go through this, but you're kind of like, I need to get out of the Romanian community. Oh, yeah. I think we all go through it.
I think we all have our little phase where we...
Yeah. So I kind of had that phase where I was just like, this girl is so nice to me, and then she talks crap about me, and then like again I think we were too young to even confront it, or for me I was more like it's not worth my time. So it's also like growing up and maturing and being like maybe I needed that space from these people at that time, but now like we can be friends, or we can like kind of laugh it off and be like yeah, we were just immature. But I think when I still hear like girls in their late 20s and 30s and 40s, I'm like, we're not in high school anymore. Like we
exactly. And someone needs to say that. I mean, it's true that you said it. Someone needs to say it. It's just because you're a certain age, that doesn't mean that you're mature. It doesn't stop. Yeah. It doesn't mean you're emotionally mature. And then sometimes it takes, like for me, I told you, now that I've seen my daughter, that it's like, oh my gosh, she like can't apologize. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so hard to deal with. So it's like sometimes God will like open your eyes in a different way too. So
yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, to wrap it up, I think we have some important points to remember. First would be separate the person from the conflict. That way you don't attach negative feelings to that person, and then you can get to the point of like, I can't stand them anymore. So I feel like that's important. I know it's hard.
Yeah.
Instead of just seeing that person as the conflict, it's like, no, this is the conflict. That's just the person. Another one is work together by not placing blame on the other party and take ownerships of your own issues.
Yeah.
The other one is agree to disagree. Each person has a unique point of view. Being right is not what's important. During conflict, seeking the truth can trap you rather than set you free. Truth is relative to the person's point of view. That's a hard one to swallow.
It's a hard pill to swallow for sure. But you can't force people, like you can't force your truth on people. As much as even if your truth is the absolute truth, that person has free will. You can't force it on them. You're only stressing yourself out by trying to do it. You're only ruining the relationship. So just accepting like, okay, even if we disagree about this, that's fine. I know going forward, you know, this is what we disagree on, and
it is what it is. And finally, focus on the future of the relationship and what steps to take forward in order to better the relationship.
That would be the ultimate end goal. But if you know that the other person, like I said, is not a willing party, because a relationship takes equal work on both parties. Sometimes, yes, you go, I think, through seasons where like, hey, my friend is going through a rough time, I got to be a little bit more there for them, but it has to be a back and forth. If you see a recurring pattern of I'm always there for you and you're never there for me, that's a toxic relationship.
Red flag.
That's a red flag. It's a toxic relationship. So like focusing on the future of the relationship, and you want to better the relationship, that can also be the relationship with yourself. So if at the end of a conversation you're like, okay, you're not going to take the steps, you don't want to work on it, like that's fine, but I gotta better myself going forward.
That's good.
So I think you wrapped it up really well. We have a challenge for you guys this week. If you're involved in any type of a conflict, I hope you're not, but if you are, try to use one of the skills we suggested in the episode, and if you want and feel comfortable, like report back your results in our anonymous suggestion box. Other than that, guys, we want to thank you so much for being here with us today. We hope that this information was beneficial to you guys and educational. Please don't forget to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify so you can keep up with our new episodes. And we'll see you guys back here next Tuesday.